Here are all the mistakes in portrait painting I want to save you from making. My name is Daniel. I'm the owner and founder of the Raminfard School of Arts. I've been drawing and painting now for 40 years, and if there was one mistake that I'd like to save you from, it's undervaluing the importance of planes. When it comes to drawing the head, one of the most important things is to understand the planes of the face, which is why this video is about the planes of the head, particularly the Asaro head. Let's take a tree for example. Most people start outlining what a tree looks like instead of truly looking at it in terms of parts and pieces. So there's the bottom plane, the side plane, the top, and of course another side plane. If you look at it this way, suddenly it makes sense why the top of it is a little more yellow, why the bottom is a little cooler, or why the side might be warmer. So if that's true for a tree, then it is for a face and for everything else that you paint. Focusing on the planes is what really makes a difference of changing a face that looks flat and mask-like into something very dynamic. Let's get into it. Okay, so here we go. The first thing that I'm going to do is get an idea as to where I want my top, back of the head, front of the head, bottom of the head, and base. You know what we're going to do? We're going to bring this up. So now what we have is this to this. Let's see if that's right. One more time. Yeah, that feels about right. It should be shorter by about like 10%, I think. Let's see. We might need to bring it up even more. And I think that should feel right. So that being the case, I can kind of sense that the back of this head is somewhere here. And I'm gonna start off with really flat lines with this, because those are clean and measurable lines. Curves are really hard to get right. So I'm just gonna start off with some flat lines. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, right about here is where I'm seeing the chin going across and up through here. So I'm just ghosting something in for now. Going up through here, and then I think it's not a bad time for us to just get the general shape of the nose. Going across, 1, 2, 3, yeah, it kind of fits the typical rule of thirds. So let's see, 1, 2, so there's your nose, and there's your chin. So I think our proportions aren't bad, but it always gets adjusted as you draw and paint. And I spend a lot of time in this early phase, this drawing phase. And it doesn't matter if you're drawing with a brush or a pencil. For me, it's all the same, because ultimately painting is all the same. It's just, painting is just drawing with a brush. At least that's my experience. I mean, some people might feel differently about it. Kind of seeing this curvature underneath and it goes across. Still trying to keep my lines relatively straight. I'll always get more accurate lines that way, so that feels good. I feel like maybe that's a little long, but I don't want to nitpick at any part. I'm just trying to get general information down. I definitely see the socket of the eye kind of moving across. This part actually reads a lot flatter than I expected. So I'm going to flatten that out. You'll notice I'm trying to give a little more space here than here. Otherwise it'll look awkward, it'll look like it's too cut off. So I'm just trying to be mindful of my negative space as I'm drawing my positive. So where's that land? That lands right on the chin line, right? Or the jaw actually, right? So let's see, I'm looking, and if it continues, it kind of rolls all the way up to about right there. So that means that my ear goes up and across, pulls down, and it goes across like so, to about right here. So I think that's not bad. Continuing on. Is that at that sharp of an angle? I'm not quite sure. But a lot of it is going to change when you actually paint. So I don't kill myself to get it all perfect. I think that's where everybody gets really lost, is that they try to get too accurate a drawing up front. And you want to start off loose and then slowly tighten up. Looking at the socket here. Wow, that's a lot of information. So it's easy to get overwhelmed, but I'm just looking for the big shapes here and trying to simplify. And I think that's one of the things that takes time to really learn, is how do you simplify what you see? Well, look for the biggest shapes that make the most amount of sense to you. And over a period of time, you'll start to realize, you know, at first you'll say, okay, well, this shape is important. Like, for example, I used to draw all of this, right? Everything that was going on here. But now what I tend to do is I look at it and I say, well, there's the muzzle of the mouth right here, this curvature. and then it drops into the chin. And that's usually broken down into thirds. And so I'll check that 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that feels right. And so I'm pretty happy with how that is coming out. I think I'm gonna say that from this point moving back and below into right about here is where I'm seeing the neck. And for me, it's a simple line. There's the Adam's apple, but you know, it's a simple line. Same thing basically coming from behind the ear. It pulls down at about this line. And then back here I have, let's see, is that right? It should land here. So yeah, I feel like that's about right. Just start with your general shape and then tighten up. I mean, so much gets revealed when you're actually painting. And you start to realize, oh, this part's a little wider, this part's a little smaller. I like that curve going across. From behind the ear, that line pulls through right here. So that's good. And believe it or not, it feels like it just simply continues until it hits the base where it curves. So somewhere roughly around here. And then I'm gonna say like right about here is where I'm seeing that drop. Curving across and into this space, and then curving through. So it may not be a bad idea just to create a cylindrical base. And I almost never draw this part, but I think for the purpose of a painting, it makes sense to get this base down. I can see a line going across here that kind of indicates the side plane, and then moving across into the cheek. I will define a little bit of the mouth, which feels like it pulls across, it drops down, and then down again, which eventually creates this triangle right here. This part pulling in. Anything else that I may want to, I think I'm pretty confident that the rest of it we can adjust in paint. A lot of times I'll add a little value just so that I have a better understanding as to what I'm actually looking at. Definitely all of this lands in shadow. I think my main concerns is just, does my negative and positive space work together? Because that's gonna be the really hard part to fix. I think we're pretty much where we wanna be. So we're gonna get this sprayed, and then we are going to wash the canvas with a gray undertone, which will really help us. And then using the black and white palette, we're gonna paint this out. Okay, so we're outside of the studio and we're using Fine Art Fixative. This is by Krylon and it's a great product. It's what we use here at the studio in between our drawing and our painting. So we're gonna shake this up. And what you wanna do is move side to side, up and down, and then side to side again. I usually give it about 3 coats. And the real test is rubbing your finger across it. If it's no longer smudging, then you're good. So I've already sprayed this and we're ready to start painting. Before we dive into the painting, here's a quick breakdown on how to approach mixing your values for a painting like this. There are 2 colors that come straight out of the tube, your white and your black. Then we're gonna create 2 darks, 2 lights, and 2 mediums. Now let's add a value that lands between our mediums and our lights, and another value that lands between our darks and our mediums. That now gives you 8 values to choose from, which is the perfect range for a painting like this. Okay, so we're working in acrylic and we're starting with only 2 colors, and we'll be using only 2 colors for this entire painting. And that's titanium white and ivory black. And essentially what I'm doing is just a simple wash. So there's a lot of confusion around what a wash is, and I'm gonna give it to you as clearly as I can define it. A wash is what you want as a color that'll peer through if you missed a spot. So if it's a color that you feel like would work if it was peering through, having missed a spot on your painting, then that is most likely the most appropriate color to use. So in this case, a light gray would work great for me. Now, the first thing that I'm gonna start with is that extra dark. And the reason why I start with that is because it's the darkest part of the head that I can find, which will allow me to establish my lightest colors, which is over by the cheek and indicates probably the lightest tone that I'm going to have, and my darkest. So everything else is going to fit in between. And I like to get that in early, especially when it comes to portraiture. Now, the idea here is to lay in the largest blocks first. And what I mean by that is the largest shapes that I can find. And immediately I notice that the ear needs to move in, which is exactly why I keep on saying over and over and over again that painting is drawing with a brush. If I see something that's gone wrong, I need to immediately address that. In other words, you never stop drawing, meaning that you're looking at shape, color, value, and edge to make sure that those are working for you. Having laid in a few more blocks, I'm ready to actually put in my background. So I'm going to have a very smoky background as a finish, but the idea here is that where the dark side of the portrait is, we're going to have lighter colors, and where the light side of the portrait is up in the front, we're going to have darker colors. Now, in order to get this background to work, I need to get the dark and the light to transition. Otherwise, it'll look very awkward, and it'll be too strong of a contrast in which it'll pull your eye away. So we don't want the eye pulled away from the portrait. We want everyone to be looking at that head. So it's exactly why I'm introducing that middle value and allowing for it to blend. So those edges need to be soft. Here's yet another drawing error that I noticed, that the jaw is off. So I push that line up. And again, I'm looking at shape. I'm literally traveling shape to shape and making sure that, like a puzzle, it all fits together nicely. And as I'm doing all of this, I have very simple questions going on in my head. Is it the right shape? Is it the right value? Now that I have moved the ear and the jaw, it's probably a wise idea to just simply block out that ear. Never be afraid of losing the drawing you have underneath. The second coat and third coat are going to be stronger because you're just that much more familiar with what you're painting. Now, one thing I'll mention that may be challenging for new artists is that on the very same plane, you will have a subtle gradation. So even though it's all sitting on one plane, there sometimes might be a subtle change in value. Do you need to get that right away? Absolutely not. Even if you leave it out, you're probably just fine. But just be aware that it's there. And again, now that I've made some corrections with my drawing, what I need to do is make some adjustments with my shapes in paint. And like I said before, it'll probably be stronger the second time around. So you're going to see me pop in this triangle that lands right from the cheekbone rolling out towards the back of the jaw. And that shape right there is going to be a much more accurate shape than my original drawing. Never sacrifice your painting for your drawing. So it's right about this point where I start focusing on smaller shapes that help me better understand the form. So until I get most of my big shapes in, I'm not going to do the smaller shapes. Does that mean that I have to have every single one of my large shapes done? No, but the majority is definitely there. You'll see that I'll leave a few of these larger shapes unfinished till the end because I frankly don't think that they're that important. But in terms of getting a well-rendered head, this is where I start to move in to some of these smaller forms. From here on out, I have two goals, and that is to first pop in whatever smaller planes I need to get in and to make sure that they read well in terms of their lights and darks. And secondly is to fill in anything that I've missed through my large blocking phase. Now moving down towards the bottom of the piece, I'm bringing in some darker color to help it feel like there's a table that it's sitting on, and I'm not going to work on any detailing or anything like that. I'm just trying to get in a large mass of color. Once I have that in, I'll add in a few more of these planes and I'm done. I'm ready to move into my oil phase. So are these values perfect? No. Do these shapes need further refinement? Absolutely. But all of that will be taken care of during the third iteration where I'm working in oils. Now that I'm switching over to oil, the very first thing I'm going to do is add medium to my surface. And what this is a mixture of paint thinner and walnut oil. So it's a 50-50 mixture, and it allows for me to get a nice slick feel to the surface that I'm about to paint on. An added benefit to using this simple medium is that it also helps to dry much faster. So having done this, I'm no longer in a position to go back to acrylic. Now, if you'll notice, I rubbed my finger against the surface and double checked to see just how wet it is. You want your surface slick to the touch, but not wet. That's very important. And the reason is you don't want your paint sliding around on too wet a surface. And more importantly, you definitely don't want it to bead up and drip and then dry that way. So the reason why I switched over from acrylic and into oil is because this is the perfect medium for me to make adjustments and refinement. One of the properties of oil that makes it unique is that it dries much slower, and it also allows for me to add medium to make it thinner and thinner, which makes it more transparent. So I can also glaze. So if you'll notice, I'm starting with the background, and the reason is because I want to make sure that some of the darkest colors that I have on the canvas read well. And I'm doing that by contrast. Now it's time for me to darken that corner in the back of the head, because without that dark, I'm not indicating clearly that light is coming from the left-hand side. Remember, it's the shadows that render the form. So the shadows in many ways are more important than the light. Let's now drop down to the bottom of the mannequin where the base of the model is and get in some of those lighter colors, because that is also a clear indication that it's sitting on a table, it's sitting on a surface, and it's catching the same light that's going across the face. I'm going to move up now towards the upper part where the cheek is and make sure that that bright punch of light is definitely coming through and reading well. That clearly is a very important shape because it literally faces the light. It may actually be the only facet of the planes of this head that is actually facing the light fully. And now up top towards the forehead and other parts of the head, where I see a great deal of light, because that also needs to really be pronounced. I also want to point out that in cases where the color is a little strong, I wipe it down and bring it back to the original tone. Let's now refine the shape here, because as we are painting, we are constantly drawing. So just because something has been painted before doesn't mean that we have to honor what was there. I'm more interested in capturing what I'm actually seeing off of the model, especially in portraiture. Here we go with some more adjustments and shape refinement. Notice how tightly I'm holding my brush. Never forget that no matter what, you are always drawing, even if you've got a paintbrush in your hand. That is exactly why I'm choking the brush and really holding it like I would a pen or a marker. Okay, so let's attack the nose. Here I'm going to sharpen up that line, and I'm going to add these very intricate microplanes that really make a difference in terms of the finishing of a portrait. So these are the kinds of things that you want to save till the end, and I find that most students actually end up doing them way too early. As I mentioned before, it's the shadows that render the form, and this is the proof. By adding in these shadows inside of the nose, it's really where you finally get to see all of that light pop through. Having added a lot more of these microplanes, particularly the shadows, you can see how the nose finally has its character. Let's now add some darks in the background, and in doing so, what I'm basically doing is brightening the front. So the darks in the background are going to push my value forward. They're going to really help to get these lights to pop hard. And that's exactly what we want. We want the eye to go to where the light is. This is an overlooked part of portraiture, is that a lot of people think that they need to add white to something to make it brighter, and then they can't understand why their color got washed out. Well, the answer usually is to add darks to something adjacent to help you read just how light something is. So I'm facing a very common problem. Having enhanced some of the light in the face, other parts of the painting started to look dark. So I need to now adjust value again. So you're constantly adjusting, you're constantly refining. You're refining shapes, you're adjusting values, and this is going to be an ongoing process, in particular with portraiture. And just because something is on the same plane doesn't mean that it's all one single value. There are reasons for it to be slightly darker or lighter within the same plane. So whether you're painting this mannequin or an actual face, make sure to pay very close attention to the subtle shifts inside of a plane. So having gone through a number of different parts of the head, it's time to adjust the ear. And this is where, again, we're adding in our lights and our darks right on top of that mid-sized plane. So we originally painted it as one flat plane, and now we are adding in these microplanes. Okay, our ear is looking good. It's now time to move on towards that shadow, and I really need to soften that up. So I'm gonna really try and get that very soft shadow reading across. And that's a key component to painting faces, is that you're really looking for soft lines. When we're painting something like this, it's going to be really intense with these very sharp changes in value, but you want to maintain relatively soft lines on a real life face. Now for the funnest part of all, adjusting the background. I'm not going to do a deep dive into creating this very romantic background. What I basically want to do is have something that's very functional using Rembrandt's technique, and that is to basically vignette and darken any part of the canvas that's taking up a lot of real estate but isn't doing much in terms of telling the story. What you'll notice is that the color is semi-opaque. That's because I've got a good amount of medium in there. And what that's going to do is help it dry faster, and secondly, blend really nicely. So I'm using a paper napkin to really soften things up and allow for that glow to work for me. And I'm going to rub this color pretty much everywhere that I think will help push your eye forward. So I'm darkening everything that isn't something that I want you to look at. And I don't know about you guys, but I find this phase absolutely satisfying, to really finish up the piece by darkening things and creating this really dramatic background that pushes your eye towards the main subject. It's kind of a reinforcement of everything that you've already done. So I'm going to let this dry, pop in one or two final touches, and then I'll photograph it and present it to you guys. This was a lot of fun to make, and I highly encourage all of you to practice this with the Asaro Head as often as you can. So there it is. I hope that you've learned that the most important thing, particularly in portrait painting, is understanding your planes. Once you start seeing them, you can't unsee them. So a quick recap, we first started with the drawing, then the underpainting, doesn't matter whether it's acrylic or oil, and finally finishing it off in oil to really get some of those subtle details in. If you want to go deeper into this subject, I have 3 separate videos on this very subject, and what you just watched was actually a compilation of all of it. So feel free to go through that series and the many other subjects that I cover in this channel. Thank you for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.